Good morning, everybody.
Morning.
Hello.
Morning.
Morning.
Right, this is absolutely wonderful having a group of very powerful, intelligent, and we'll have something to say about the book that we're speaking about today. So, The New Age of Sexism. It has been a while since we've done a women-led book club, but people get very, very busy. But I feel that this is the right time with the right book and amazing people to talk about this. And I think it will lead in really well in terms of where we want this space to move forward to in terms of education. So I know, Kerry, you've picked up on a few things about the Keeping Children Safe in Education policy, which we'll talk about as well. So thank you, Louise. Thank you, Kerry. Thank you, Carly. And thank you, Vivienne, for your time on a Sunday morning. I'm sure that we'd all be sort of just chilling before we go back into whatever we're doing on Monday. But I think we can all agree that this is a really important book to talk about and discuss. And I know that all of you will want to highlight certain things from the book that you want to move forward with. The thing that I found reading this book was I felt very, very raw reading it throughout, because there were some things where I thought we'd move past this, but actually the metaverse, AR, VR, they're being written by people who obviously have a certain lens when it comes to seeing other human beings. So it seems to have almost magnified certain issues in the real world. So that's interesting. The other thing that I found about this book was my initial thoughts were that the empathy gap, like we talk a lot about the importance of empathy and understanding each other from a human lens, but that has become a chasm when I read this book. I feel that empathy just doesn't seem to be something that is there when it comes to AI. The entitlement as well that has come through in terms of men's entitlement to women's bodies, women's minds, just women as a commodity rather than a human being, sort of led me to get to a very, it's a very depressing statement that I'm going to make, but the permanence of patriarchy is what was coming through to me, that this is a system that we are very well aware of, but it's incessantly becoming permanent. It's not something that's eroding in the way that we were hoping it would do. Those were my initial thoughts reading this book. I'm just going to open it up to all of you lovely ladies, and what was the overriding feeling that you had or are having reading this book? So Louise, we'll start with you.
I mean, I've just got so much to say. I'm not quite sure where to start. I think it's one of these things, we're talking about it, particularly on LinkedIn. We're talking about AI as educators and leaders. And we're talking about, how do we use it in the classroom? How does staff use it to ease workload? How can our students use it for homework? Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? And it struck me how much we aren't having the conversation about the fact that it has been designed by white middle class men in the Western world. And so it's like we're not really looking at the thing itself. We're just like, oh, how can we use it? Rather than who has designed it, how has it been designed, and why? And it sounds silly, but I've never really sat down and realized that when I put things into Copilot or ChatGPT or Perplexity, any of the ones that you're using for AI, that actually when it's scouring the internet, it's scouring for what it deems to be credible sources. But those credible sources are linked to algorithms been designed by men. And so the answers they're generating are going to be reflective of white male views. And a lot of the internet is full of the culture of misogyny and deep structural patriarchy. So a lot of the answers we're now taking as AI facts are actually rooted in systemic racism and sexism. And it kind of blew my mind that I'd never really considered that. But I think it's because the conversation hasn't really gone deep enough when we're talking about it in education.
That links in really well with what Laura talks about in terms of the myopic white male gaze and asking that question, what will it cost us? So I think it'd be good to dive into that. Thank you, Louise. Kerry, you made a really great point in terms of, before we came on, in terms of who is designing certain things that we've read about in the book. So I don't know if you wanted to sort of add on to what Louise said in that vein.
Well, when I was reading the book, I thought, this isn't my world. And you've used some terms here this morning already, Kiran and Louise, that makes me very aware of what I don't know and what I don't understand and what I hadn't heard of before, or perhaps I'd heard a little bit. They're on the sort of a periphery of my they're on the periphery of my lived experience. But Louise, when I was reading the book and I was away for a few days with my husband, who is in the technology development world, he devises financial systems, so not the metaverse or AI girlfriends, I just want to say. But when we design something, we have a mindset, or we have some parameters, or we have some values, I even want to go as far to say, and some ways of believing that it is acceptable to behave, to think. And so this artificial, that's a really interesting word, isn't it? This artificial intelligence world that is being created by human beings who take into their workspace. They go off to work in the morning, they say goodbye to their mums, their dogs, their children, and they go off to work, and they are creating something with a set of algorithms, with a set of values, with a set of behaviors. And that really, I didn't use your language, Kiran, but the permanence of patriarchy, the deep rootedness of discrimination, of bias, of sexism is so normalized, acceptable in these people's behaviors, because they've gone into their office, they've gone into onto their work desk and say, okay, I'm going to develop a little bit more of my AI girlfriend, and she's going to be subservient. She's going to be yes, I want to serve you. I won't argue with you. I will pick up your clothes after you, or whatever it is. So that really troubled me, ladies. That really troubled me. And I thought, this isn't about AI. This is about the deep rootedness of patriarchy, misogyny.
I would agree, Kerry, absolutely. And I picked out one quotation from the chapter about discrimination, that they are vomiting racism, sexism, inequality back to us. And that's what was scaring me. And these men that have created all of these options are multi-billionaires. So that they're doing it for profit, and to make sure that their way of life is perpetuated through AI. So they want to make money, but they also want to make us, or not us here, they want to make everybody think the way they want to think. And I find that really challenging and disgusting.
Thank you, Vivienne. Carly, obviously you have two young daughters, don't you, as well? So I don't know if you want to sort of come in from, because this is a world that, because one of the things that Laura makes a really pertinent point, actually, and it made me sort of stop and think. Children are digital natives. They are growing up in a world where digital is normal. It is their normal. And Louise, you'd mentioned the word, I don't know, I keep coming back to it, but when we're reading some of the things that we're coming across in this book, and we know that this is not normal, we know this is odd, like it is just very odd behaviour. And so it does need to be critically analysed in that sense, because I think there's other things going on in that space. They're growing up with parents who are not digital, they're non-native. So therefore your perception of technology, and Kerry, you've sort of said it, like it's on the periphery of our sort of lived realities, of our lived experiences. So I don't know if you want to come in with that lens, Carly, into this.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's prompted really interesting discussions in my household. I have a 12-year-old and a 16-year-old, both girls. And you're absolutely right, Kiran, in that I can honestly say that the whole idea of the metaverse and lots of the elements in this book are things that I'm not familiar with. I mean, I consider myself quite technically savvy, but and I try my best to keep abreast of everything, but absolutely I don't have this level of knowledge or experience or expertise. But my children are both very sort of immersed in a digital world. And so it's prompted really interesting discussions about safety. And then when I had discussions about safety with my girls, I then was drawn to Laura's argument in this book about how what we tend to do is focus on how girls can keep themselves safe in these spaces instead of asking the better question, which is why aren't these spaces designed to, eradicate predatory behavior, or to, like be sort of more values aligned, or and to make sure that it's safe not just for women and girls but absolutely for everybody. But it isn't, of course, because as we've said already, it's designed by certain people from certain stratas of society with certain motivations. And so actually safety isn't a mechanism that's built into it, it's something that is applied afterwards. And actually the focus of that safety, or the responsibility for the safety, is really on the user as opposed to the creator, which and we have this conversation, don't we, with our girls, and we have it with our girls in school as well, about how you should keep yourself safe, and then we check ourselves and say, well, whilst we also want our children to keep themselves safe, what we should be doing is asking the question, like, actually, how do we prevent the behavior that is abusive or predatory or dangerous in some way? But we don't tend to do that, do we? Because we victim blame girls. So I think, this has prompted huge amounts of discussion for us in our household. And luckily, both of my girls, again, who are digital natives, and they do both interact with like virtual environments in certain ways. So there are some platforms that they do both use, like Minecraft and Roblox and things like that, which I know that, there's a lot about Roblox in here, and the dangers of it. But what we were able to do was have really kind of rigorous conversations about how they're interacting with that space, how that space presents itself to them, and how they behave. And so luckily, I mean, I'm quite pleased to say that both of my girls said that they haven't encountered anything like this so far in those worlds, but actually they were really keen to understand it, because they also felt as if it was something that was sort of slightly different and separate from their experience. I think the other thing that I just wanted to say is, and it goes back to something that people have already touched upon about the sort of design of this, is I feel like there's such a missed opportunity here, because if you were going to design a brand new virtual reality, like a new world, wouldn't it be incredible to design that world with better values, with equality baked in, rather than it be something that's replicating the current very flawed society that we have? And I think that's the bit that sort of resonated with me most. And I think just to sort of, if you don't mind, Kiran, just to read a little bit from the book.
Yeah.
So this is specifically about the metaverse, but I think it applies just generally to anything that kind of is artificial intelligence, for me anyway. And what Laura Bates says is that as we battle to eradicate from real world settings the endemic harassment and abuse that women and girls face in public spaces, it's not uncommon for feminists like myself to fantasize about having an opportunity to start from scratch, rebuilding a society in which we have zero tolerance towards such behavior. And the metaverse and AI in general presents such an opportunity. And I think that's the sadness in this, is like there's an opportunity to create, in such a better world, the kind of world that we want to live in, and where our young people and everyone, vulnerable people, feel safe. And yet that's not what we've done. And she goes on to sort of say, if we're really talking about reinventing the world, couldn't we push the boat out a little? Couldn't we dare to dream of a virtual world in which those who so often face abuse are safe by design? And I just thought that was a really interesting point as well, that in the end, what we're doing is we're on the back foot, and we're thinking about how women and girls need to keep themselves safe in those situations, rather than saying something should be safe by design. But that goes back to the point that Vivienne made and others have made about who, and Kerry, about who's designing this, with what motivations and for what purpose.
And I think you've sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of like the who it is, because it's where the power and the money lies in sort of like our lived reality. I just want to pick up on something that she'd also said as well. So Bates suggests that tech companies, particularly Meta, and for anyone who knows the story of how, like, there's a reason why I never chose to be on Facebook, because of how it started. Like, it was to diminish a girl's confidence because she said no to not wanting to go out with him. So, like, I mean, that's literally says it all, really, doesn't it? But they're repeating past failures to protect women and girls. And how does, and this is the point, how does this negligence contribute to what she calls a perfect storm of misogyny in an emerging virtual environment? It's almost like the power play is there, because when we think about misogyny, we think about it's about manipulation and control and power. It's there, it's like a boys' club in that sense, isn't it? That's how I sort of read this. That, and then when you look at Meta dismissing victims are the outside of mainstream, whose mainstream is this then? Because it sounds and feels like this space isn't actually meant for women and girls. It's meant for women and girls who are susceptible to harm, who are vulnerable, who basically they'd want to take advantage of. So it's not made for everybody, is it? So it's, I think that, I don't know how we dig into that, but it's, I don't know, from an educational perspective, from a parental perspective, the fact that everyone has access to it and it's easily accessible, yet it's not for all of us. How are we able to avoid this perfect storm of misogyny happening in virtual reality?
I think that's, for me, the really challenge, that is what's really challenging my thinking, and that's where I am with the book at the moment. From an education viewpoint, this is, on the one hand, a world that is accessible to everybody, and our children and young people can find themselves in this space. And we as educationalists have been given the responsibility to equip children and young people with the skills to challenge and critique and apply acceptable, mainstream acceptable equality and inclusive behaviours. Yeah, but what they're experiencing is a world where the very opposite is facilitated, enabled. So if we just take an example about how we in that metaverse chapter about an avatar groping a female avatar. Now, if that was in the classroom, in a school context, a young person touching or invading somebody's personal space, it would be completely and utterly unacceptable. And I can see and hear the conversation with the young person who had engaged in that behaviour, very much understanding that they'd made the wrong choices and not being able to approve of that behaviour. Yet they then move into a virtual world where that behaviour is just normalised. And that is very troubling. That is very troubling.
Yeah, that troubled me greatly, Kerry, as did quite a lot of the statistics that Laura included. 20% of women in tech roles, that's all. 6% of professional software developers. 18% of authors are women. 1.6% were multicultural. So it is the white men who are taking this over, it seems to me. And female founded AI companies earn less venture money than men earn. And the thing that really worried me was that women are more likely to lose their jobs due to AI rather than men, because women are working in completely different areas very often. And my blood absolutely boiled. I just have to get this right. When Laura referenced the gender pay gap, because it's disgusting that would even be something that would be generated or talked about. I've spent years in women ed educating women that the gender pay gap is nasty and true. And if this comes in and they start all talking about that's nonsense, there's no gender pay gap, then women are again being sacrificed, as it were, for the sake of multi-billionaires to earn more money. And I think that's absolutely disgraceful.
Yeah, Louise, Carly, I don't know if you want to pick up on that in terms of, I mean, Louise, you educate children, young people on the dark side of just lived experience, don't you? Like it's...
Yeah. Which bit would you like me to address in particular?
I mean, I find it, Kerry, what you said about, because I've read Unmasking the Manosphere as well over the weekend, and I don't know if it was the antidote to this one, to be fair, really, but what concerns me actually is in educational spaces, you have young boys who are sort of targeting sort of female teachers and things like that, where actually they don't seem to know it's not okay to like commodify a woman basically in a sexual way or make them feel in a certain way that isn't okay. And I don't know what, if you've picked up on any of that, Louise, in terms of like what you're seeing in education from those age boys, because obviously they're susceptible to harm as well. And I think it's really important, like I talked about the empathy chasm at the start, there does need to be a degree of empathy here, because when I think about young boys in this space, they are susceptible and they are vulnerable. And when you look at like the biology and the way that the brains and everything work, like there's a reason why they're being targeted. It's a form of terrorism in some aspects. I'm going to add it to the prevent risk assessment that we have. So when we're talking about sort of normalising the extreme objectification of women, when we're talking about almost women and girls becoming collateral damage in this sort of environment, I mean, what did you pick up from the book in terms of that? Like, are we just seen as collateral damage because the money is more important in these spaces?
I don't think we're being seen at all, and that's the problem. No one has, well, I'd say no one, that's a sweeping statement. There isn't much evidence to suggest that we have been seen. And it comes back to Carly's point about lack of forethought in design, because our current capitalist system, apologies, I'm going to go down my capitalist rant here, has been designed by men, for men. So the funding goes to men to build software companies and AI data centers that damage the environment. And they then design things with no women in mind, because there are no women on their central boards or investors panels, so they have no needs to satisfy. So there is no requirement to see a woman, because she is not the target audience, nor is she the investor, and nor was capitalism designed with her in mind. So, sorry, that's quite bleak, but it's a lack of being seen everywhere, because there is no need to see her.
Okay, so I'm going to challenge it slightly in the sense of when we're looking at certain, we've all sort of read some of the other chapters as well about the AI girlfriends, domestic abuse, things like that. It's not necessarily like women as human beings are not seen in this space. As human beings, we are not seen as that. But when you've got, so I'm just quoting some of it. So incel-inspired massacre could have been prevented by having safe sex doll brothels. They're a non-judgmental space for men to enact their violent fantasies against women. Commodifying sexual violence, is it an inevitable byproduct of capitalism? That's what I put there. Because actually you've got these sex dolls, you've got these cyber brothels, you've got... So that when we're talking about the male gaze, it does seem to be focusing on one I don't know, extreme behaviour towards women. So yes, we're not being seen as humans, but why are we becoming the victims in these spaces? I think that's the question that I'm getting to.
Yeah, I think if I could come in there. So I think going back to chapter 1, which was talking a lot about deep fakes, I think that part of this problem is, I mean, and I'm not saying it wasn't a problem before we had this kind of technology, because I think it was, but I think what it's done is amplified this sense of commodification of the female body. And if you think about the deep fakes that happen, and how lots of young women, and I'm not talking about young women who have put, you know, photographs of themselves online that are in any way kind of suggestive, just normal photographs of them that are online, of them in their normal clothes, then get taken and then using these platforms. And that's really frightening, isn't it? Because again, going back to what I said earlier about, like, of course we can tell women and girls to keep themselves safe in some ways, but actually that whole idea of having the sort of AI software and platform that can, you know, change the way they appear, can change what they do, make something look as if it's absolutely them, but in a sort of pornographic situation, that takes away every bit of agency and every bit of power and control that a woman needs and deserves. And I think that is what basically that to me, that's the bit that sort of keeps being damaging, because I think we have lots of incredible young men who are trying really, really hard to, you know, be an ally and to, you know, stand up against misogyny and all of those things. But then actually what we've got is this proliferation of the access to pornographic images that commodify and video that commodify women against their will. And I think that's really problematic for our young men, because they are exposed to it all the time. Like it's something that they are seeing constantly. So it's no wonder that in a sense they start to see that as being quite normalized, and that obviously the risk then is that impacts in their personal relationships, their view of women moving forward. So I think that kind of, it sort of starts there. And again, I think these things have potentially always been a problem, but I think they're amplified by the platforms that are, and the availability and the accessibility of that to young men now. So yeah, I just think that's probably, like, the point I want to make was that sort of where it sort of begins, I think. And then after that, there's a lot of unlearning to do after that, because actually if young men and young women, but if anyone is sort of brought up thinking that these things are normalized, then that will, like I said, inevitably impact their values or their views in real life personal relationships. And that's the bit where it gets tricky, and there's a lot of unlearning to do. So that's where it's complex.
And I think
Louise, sorry, Kerry. You and I had a talk just very recently, didn't we, for Teachers Radio? And we did a whole session on misogyny. And that is really worth people looking at that as well, because that was mostly about the misogyny that we all experience, as opposed to the quite specific elements that Carly was just talking about. And it's a path, isn't it? Laura Bates said it's all linked into misogyny, and it's growing from there. So it's probably worth, Louise, maybe you sharing with Kiran the link to that conversation, because I think we've got to start with the real world of misogyny and then build up to the AI elements, because they're there and they're all around us. So we can't just go straight in and change those. But if we can change misogyny, then that might help us, is my view.
I just want to come in there because I think Louise and Vivienne, that is absolutely where I'm landing at the moment. But I sort of feel that our young people are getting a really conflicted and confused message, because this AI world is a real world, is their world. It might not be our world, but it is increasingly their world. And what they are experiencing in that world is a deeply misogynistic universe, which is legitimized. and yet they're hearing on another space that behavior is totally unacceptable. And Laura Bates talks in throughout the book, it's woven in how those who are behaving inappropriately in this AI world are referred to as outliers, but they're not outliers because it is all of our children, all of our young people to varying degrees. And so they're getting I'm sort of seeing inside of head in a brain going like this, because what is the right message? And oh, this is just a game. This is just a bit of fun. But Vivienne, we go back time when we kind of said, no, a wolf whistle isn't nice, isn't a bit of fun, isn't a game. That is deeply insulting, and I find it highly offensive. Now, that was 40 years ago, 30 years ago, but this is now, and it's the same, but it's the same. I think it's the same, actually. It's just a different space, but it is for our young people, it is their space. And I think that's where, as educationists, we've got a really tricky path to navigate here.
I mean, Louise, you picked up on a few sort of examples from the metaverse, didn't you, about sort of like young girls being left when the moderator just left them. So when we're thinking, because I'm assuming these moderators are the adults that are meant to be the one safeguarding. So I don't know if you want to zoom into that example that you gave and what your thoughts were around that, and then maybe we can move into solutions.
Yeah, so that kind of really threw me. I'd never really thought about the metaverse, to be honest. I'm like, what is that? So I had to go away and Google what it was, and the fact it's a mix of virtual reality as well as augmented reality. And actually, I was like, even just a few minutes ago, I'm like, I'd read the book in the past couple of days, but I thought, how do you even get onto this metaverse? Like, where is that? Like, what is that thing? Because I always think like virtual reality is just like a game on like PlayStation or something. And obviously you download the app, you download the Meta app, and then you can choose the platforms you go into for different spaces, for different things. So you can go into, the author, Laura Bates, was talking about the fact she went into one when it was a bar. So it was obviously a social platform through this Meta app that she'd selected. And she went in, and then one of the nights that she was there were young girls. And she could tell that the avatars were looking older than the voices of the girls that were singing on a stage. And there was what she thought was a moderator in that space, who's obviously there representing kind of the AI company or the platform. They're designed to supposedly protect the participants. But there were girls that were like, apparently they were singing for a little while, and then it was just a whole group of men at the front of the stage, just like leering at them. And when they'd finished, they shouted, "Shouldn't you be in school?" And the moderator at that point just left the virtual space and left the room. They've left essentially fully grown, we suspect, fully grown male participants in their avatars with girls. And she said that she thought one of them sounded like she was 5, and she just practically left the space. And so you've essentially it's weird when you think about it, because you're like, oh, it's on a PlayStation. No, it's on their phones, it's on their laptops. And children are literally logging on in this space. And many of them are like subject to like, what's the equivalent of like real world abuse. So I think even one of the chapters, it was gruesome. They were talking about the fact there's actually been gang rapes online. How is that a thing? And like when you think that there are 4 and 5-year-olds accessing these platforms, they think they're just going onto a stage to sing. And who knows who those men are? And there's no moderators. Sometimes there's a moderator, but in many of the spaces that Laura went into online, there wasn't a moderator present. And she said that in one of the chapters, she went back into this bar again. She decided to write on the wall, how many people here have been sexually abused in this space on this platform? And apparently a lot of the other avatars in that space were like, it's common all the time. And then she wrote, is there often a moderator present? Nah. So essentially you've got an online space mirroring the real world, that isn't being policed at all. That how? And they were talking about the fact that in, again, one of the chapters, that the fact that some platforms on Meta have been designed for 3 years, they were in use and there were no parental control settings. How is that a thing? And if we're talking about solutions, it's because we've got a space that mirrors real life, but the things that are criminal in real life are not regulated in the virtual augmented reality. So how on earth can you police it? And then if you are going to put people in like moderators to police, what kind of enforcement do they have? Because these people that are kind of committing sexual crimes in virtual reality and augmented reality, there's nothing in the real world to actually hold them to account. And she was talking about the fact that many have gone to court and a couple have been successful, but it's rare because nation states haven't yet designed laws that can hold people to account in public spaces like that.
I feel your anger and the tension there, Louise, and the frustration, all those adjectives, and it makes me very, very concerned, troubled, angry. How can we keep children safe in education? You know how hard we all have to work with the keeping children safe in education when this is their world. They're bringing that into our schools, and it is legit. That is without any safeguards there. It is all legitimized. It's all normalized. There is nobody there saying, "Whoa, stop!" And that collision of those worlds is very troubling for those of us in leadership roles, or any role, parent role, carer role, just as human beings. Is very troubling. Very troubling.
Okay, so I think it's good that we're having a natural pause because it is heavy. Going into the solutions, I think you've all touched on this in the sense of like the real world hasn't really caught up with certain things that we need to have in place to safeguard women and girls anyway. And if we look at sort of the history in terms of men's entitlement over women, like we're still very backwards in some countries, we're just not moving forward at all. So and I think that's why I went back to that permanence of patriarchy. Like it seems to be this stain that just we can't seem to get rid of. It's been amplified, as Carly has said, in a space where actually there could be an amazing opportunity to create something that is it could be absolutely beautiful for any human being to walk into. And Vivienne, you've picked up on that, and Laura says it as well. So the solution lies in completely transforming the fabric of society in which thousands of men are eager to pay to abuse women and girls. And that's why the question around commodifying sexual violence just seems to be a thing in these spaces, because that's where the money is as well. Again, very deeply concerning. So where do we see opportunities? And this is a big question, but we know there has to be questions. Like, where do we see the opportunities to really sort of cut through this and make it really clear that this is not okay in the spaces that we understand, which is more so the real world than the VR world? Is it through critical literacy? Is it through policies like Kitsy? Is it, because I think it's down to tech giants being held accountable when I think about it. These people are the ones with the power. These are the people that have these ideas, as Kerry has alluded to, that are then free to create these worlds where we are enabling harm.
I think a helpful solution to that is to look at the countries where they've already tackled it. So that's quite a few of the Nordic countries. And in Australia, they've immediately reduced the way in which children can access social media in that way. We can give age perspectives onto them. And I'm very frustrated that in what seem to be much more liberal countries are not tackling this with a ferocity that our children deserve. So we should be saying this to our MPs, to everyone that we think we could influence, to say children are not safe in this new world. So it's down to the adults, as it were, to make sure that there is regulation and that there is a code for all of this kind of work. And I don't understand why everybody in the world isn't doing that. I really don't understand that.
Because
So does
money
it
drives the world, though, doesn't it? So we talk about politicians ruling the world. They don't. They're puppets. You know, the people that really run the world are the Elon Musks and the Jeff Bezoses of the world. So the governments have their hands tied because their donations are coming in from wealthy male investors, usually white investors. So governments are therefore not going to propose bills, move into legislation, because they want to be re-elected. And there's an issue there, like politics has never been run by politicians, whether elected or not. It's always been run by.
But there are countries that have done that.
Yeah.
So if they can do it, and, you know, Australia, I wouldn't have thought it's any less susceptible than we are, but they have determined that children under a certain age cannot be using social media. And we're still faffing around about that kind of dialogue in this country. And that, I referred to a path earlier. If we don't actually say that AI has got to be designed by more than just real multi-billionaires, and there isn't a code by which they are being regulated, then we're pandering to those millionaires because we're not pushing our governments to do anything.
Well, I've just had a look, Vivienne, at the demographics of the Australian Parliament, and they've actually got close to gender parity. So female parliamentarians make up approximately 50% of the Australian federal parliament. This near gender parity was cemented following the 2025 federal election, which is a historic high for women in both chambers. So I think that might also have something to do with it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that means we've got to be, I mean, in Women Ed, we do this all of the time. And we had a brilliant blog published a couple of months ago about women in AI, and that's worth having a look at. So I think sometimes we've just got to express these concerns and the solutions much more strongly.
I did go on to, I haven't read the whole book, but I was getting stuck. I was going down a hole and I didn't like it. So I read the final chapter, the solutions chapter, and I would suggest that you don't read the book in a normal sequence. Read a couple of chapters and then go to the solutions chapter, and then go back. And we must be ruthless and tireless in pursuit of a higher standard. At the bottom of page 267. We must be ruthless and tireless in pursuit of a higher standard. And women throughout history have been ruthless and tireless in pursuit of a higher standard. And I feel depressed, but not any less ruthless or tireless in my pursuit. I feel depressed that still in this 21st century, I'm still having to say this to women of the world. I have got my Women Support the World, Support Women, Support the World t-shirt on today, that we are yet again going to do the heavy lifting, to do the work, but the work needs to be done. And
absolutely,
we must do it. And I must not be sucked into that abyss of despair, which is where I felt I was going when I was reading some of the chapters. So I've used the word troubled several times this morning, but I want to hold on to my ruthlessness and my tirelessness. I might be worn down, but I'm not worn out.
Brilliant, brilliant.
Yeah, brilliant, I agree. I love that, Kerry, thank you. I think being ruthless and tireless in our advocacy for...
It's Laura's words, not mine. Laura's words.
Well, Laura's as well, but you expressed them so beautifully. I think that's absolutely true. I also just want to throw in one other thing about solutions, which I don't think we think about that often, and that is that the young people themselves are part of the solution here. I am, you know, I spend my life thinking about the dangers and I'm thinking about how we can protect them. Of course, as educators, that's what we do. But I also don't want to take away agency from young people, because I think, and especially when I talk to my two daughters, but also when I've talked to the many, many young people that I've educated over the years as well, I'm always struck actually by how values-led they are, how they want a more equal world. And although it's very easy for us to sort of put both boys and girls sort of into the brackets of victim a lot of the time, as if they need, and of course they must be protected. I think I'm so encouraged by so many teenagers today who actually are really clear about these issues, want also to be ruthless and tireless, you know, want to have sort of social action as part of their lives, and want to fight for equality. I mean, I'm lucky to have two daughters who are really vociferous in their desire to make a more equal world for themselves and for their friends. And I don't think that's just because, you know, they've grown up in my household. I think it's because they've learned so much from the world around them and from their school and the educators that they're lucky to have. So I just think sometimes I need to remind myself, like, the kids are all right. Okay, the kids of the young people of this world, that a lot of it lies with them. And I think as long as they know that we are fighting on their behalf tirelessly and ruthlessly to help keep them safe and to help to make sure that laws kind of catch up with technology, I think that they'll be appreciative of that and take that mantle forward, because we've got such incredible young people. So I think, yeah, just to remember that there's a lot of hope that lies with them as well.
Yes.
Thank you, ladies. Right, I'm gonna, because we've got 10 minutes left now, so just sort of thinking about like closing statements. And I think it's lovely how you sort of started that, Carly, in terms of like, I believe that too. I think if we educate the children in a way where we're brave and courageous and sort of naming certain things like misogyny, this is what it is, this is what it looks like, so they know what to look out for. I think that is part of a solution for me anyway, in terms of my role in education. But what do you see your roles being? Now, again, that's quite a bit of responsibility that I'm putting on us, but I think that being ruthless and tireless and determined is absolutely what we must be doing, because, yeah, none of us are happy with the standards at present. So if we start with Vivienne, so I'm sure you're going to say something about the gender pay gap in it as well, which I'm hoping you will say.
No, I've done that. We're talking to some partners about how the women ed community can get involved with AI. We're only in the early stages of that at the moment, so I can't give any further details. But I think it's something that we've got to get hold of for women. We have to tell women that they're not being replicated, they're not being represented in a way that we're comfortable with, or they would be comfortable with. So I think it's a project that is just starting with us, and we've got some great people in our Northern Ireland network who contributed to the blog I mentioned, and I'm looking forward to talking with them as to what they feel we can do within our own schools. So it's a bit vague at the moment, but we're on it.
Brilliant. Kerry, I mean, you're CEO.
So I'm going to hone in on this word artificial. This is an artificial world. It is not just there. And I really want to unpack that word with the children and young people and the adults that I work with, and therefore that critical thinking, that criticality, that questioning, that asking that question, is this something that I am happy with? And I want to go back to something that Carly said about our young people and about our agency. And my son is 30. Where did that go? But he works in the financial sector, very male dominated world. And he came home last Christmas, just after Christmas, and he shared with us an incident at their office Christmas party. And he said, whether you call it whistleblow or whatever you call it, he said, I wasn't happy and I wasn't going to allow that on my watch. And he said, we don't speak to our colleagues in that way. I don't care if it was drink. He said, there's no excuse. That is not the way that I have been brought up. That is not my world. So we create our world. This is an artificial world. And so artificial intelligence, just that, I don't know how I'm going to do it, but my assemblies, my talks, my working with children, young people, and all the adults in my trust is to confirm that it's artificial. It's not the real world. So we create the real world, and that's where I'm going to go, having read this book.
Thank you, Kerry. Carly?
Yeah, so I'm reminded of when I was the deputy head at Northampton School for Girls for 9 years, and it was a privilege to be a senior leader in a girls' school. And that's actually when I got involved with Women Ed back then. That just felt like the right time. Everything got intersected in a way that was perfect. And I think right back from that time all the way through to now, and just having recently read this book, I feel like the main thing that I want to continue to do is to be an advocate for women and girls, and to call it out, as you said, Kiran, call out misogyny when I see it, not be afraid to do that, be tireless and ruthless, but also just really brave and courageous. And sometimes in environments it's not easy to be courageous, to call something out, because in a very male dominated environment that feels like you are risking something. But I think over the years, one of the things I've done and feel much more empowered to do now is to be able to take that risk and say what I need to say and call it out. And you know, sometimes in education we're in male dominated spaces and it feels uncomfortable doing that, so I think it's about getting comfortable with the uncomfortable in that situation. So that's what I'm going to continue to do. And I just want to add as well that, you know, as some of you may know, I've actually moved just very recently from the education sector into the construction industry. Who knew? But still very much with like an education slant to it, because we're building for schools, looking at inclusion bases and SEND classrooms and things like that. But what's really interesting for me is I'm now in a very male dominated industry. And it now feels even more important for me, really, because I want to advocate for women and girls in an industry where they are just invisible. And, you know, and even just myself interacting in an industry which is so male dominated, way more than education, it just feels new and different again, and also really challenging. So I feel a sort of renewed sense of actually wanting to advocate for women and girls, and also sort of open up construction as well for them too, because it just feels like an opportunity for me to be able to make a mark and make a difference in a way that perhaps I hadn't foreseen I'd be able to have when I was working in schools. So yeah, so to continue to be tireless and you know, relentless in my pursuit of advocacy for women and girls in a new industry, that's what I'm going to do.
Thank you. Louise?
There are two things that I'd like to see in education, and I'm going to take it back to education because, like we said, as Vivienne was mentioning, the AI comes as a result of our culture. So there are two things I want to see schools and trusts doing, and this is something that Vivienne and I spoke about recently on the show, which I'll put the link in to the bottom of this. I want senior leaders and trust leaders to go away and strip back find out actually what is their ethos. And I don't mean the ones that we smack on the walls around school saying resilience, productivity. What is your actual value set? And then I want them to go away and bring in their middle leaders and analyze their current systems through the lens of a woman and a young girl as a student. And I want them to evaluate their systems, because they're systems of what's going to support change. So from an SLT and a trust perspective, that's what I would expect to be seeing. And that's going to take years of work for a trust and a school. what I also then want to be seeing is I want staff to then be supported and be given the training to have the confidence in the classroom to be like, no, I'm sorry, she's still speaking. You know, even if a male member of staff comes into a classroom and cuts off one of my female students, that I'm confident enough to say, no, I'm sorry, sir, she's still speaking. And I want every member of staff in their classroom to have the autonomy to say, I'm going to redesign a space that is suitable for my girls. They have got equipment made for female hands. The learning has been designed for their voice. It's not just, oh, look, she's spoken, she's participated, cool. No. Have we actually listened to her ideas? Has the conversation built on what that girl has just said? How has the classroom used it? So mine's from two angles. I want SLT and trusts to look at culture and re-examine systems, because they're the systems that support staff to be able to do this in their classrooms. So for example, if a teacher is saying, you know, I had a student that repeatedly interrupted a female student, is it written in the behaviour policy that that isn't acceptable? And that's a system underpinning staff and their decisions. So that's kind of hefty, but that's ideally what I'd like to see. But I appreciate that's a mammoth and organic piece of work.
But it can start small with some of the examples that you've given. I think sometimes, and I think it's about being aware of it as well, in the sense of like the curriculum is there to be taught and that's great, but actually they're human beings in front of us, and a lot of the times they're taking on lots more than just the curriculum. So I think those small things are what's going to make big impacts. And I remember some of the conversations that I had with some of the children that I taught with, where actually it was just holding space and the time to really critically engage in a conversation around gender equity and what that means for girls and boys. What does it mean when they perceive each other as a girl and boy as well? What does that mean? What expectations do you have each other? So no, I think, yeah, massive job, but definitely needs to be done. So I've got here deconstructing the artifice, because I think that's really key. Because once you can deconstruct something, it means that you're critically aware of it and you can start questioning it. Elevating women's experiences, questioning what our value system is, and educating ourselves in respect to what a woman's lived experience is. Do we really fully understand that? Carly, you being in construction just seems to be the right thing at this point in time, in terms of like inclusive spaces and what that actually means, and sort of rebuilding a better world for our children is absolutely crucial. So you look at heating systems and the menopause, like there's women of certain ages in school buildings where I'm like, oh my lord, they come in here, I've got aircon, so you can just, it's all those little things that haven't been thought of because we haven't been thought of in that respect. So yeah, definitely deconstructing the artifice without, I think the only thing that I would say is that the harm is real though, and it's making sure that we do not make that any lesser, in terms of there are women and girls that are being harmed, and that is real harm, even though it is in an artificial space. We can't deny that, and I think that's really, really important. And that idea of safety and agency. Oh, I think we've solved it, ladies, sort of.
If only.
Is there anything anyone would like to finish with? I think that's been a really great sort of invitation for anyone to invest in this book and absolutely read it. And I think it's a really great point you made, Kerry, about go to the solutions a few times whilst you're reading it, because I think at certain points I felt like we were just going back in time. I felt like we were in a time machine and just going back to a time that should never have existed, I suppose, but here we are. Is there anything anyone else would like to finish with? I'm just going to say a massive thank you to you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant discussion.
No, thank you. And I do just want to shout out to Sarah Bloomer, because it was that lady who told me about this book. And once I read it, I was like, I need to talk about this book with as many people as possible. And yeah, I think you're right. I think the children are the holders in terms of like next steps and what would be a better world for them. I think it's important that we listen to them rather than do to them. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Ladies, I'm going to love you and leave you on this Sunday. Thank you so much for your time today. And once it's on YouTube, hopefully we can get the comment section open as well, because I think lots of people will have something to say about everything that we've discussed this morning. So thank you so much, and we're going to...
Bye-bye.